Hey everyone, it's Hannah. I wanted to quickly ask if you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It goes a long way in getting the show in front of other listeners. If you listen on a platform that doesn't do reviews, please follow us on social media, like the show, or leave a comment. Thank you. We love you guys, and we hope you enjoy the show. You're listening to The Tales We Tell, a podcast about spooky stories, unsolved mysteries, and local lore. I'm your host, Hannah Parch.
And I'm Katy.
Welcome back. It's our 200th episode. We made it.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Here we are at episode 100. 200. Oh my gosh. We have snacks, which we're going to try to
Avoid food noises.
Yes. I did put out the crunchiest snack, which is peanuts, but they're also the most delicious snack, so
That can be argued.
they're the most delicious. Like, you can eat so much of them and not feel terrible, in my opinion. Okay, so we're just going to dive into today's episode, which I'm really excited about. I told Katy I have cried twice during the research, but I'm not going to make you guys cry.
I was not impressed.
I'm not going to make anyone cry. It's going to be fine. Okay, Katy. We
Hannah.
start with a question always, a prompt, if you will. Do you like my t-shirt quilt?
I do.
That I brought out.
The ones that I've been able to see as you were like slowly putting it on. I was trying to read some of them. My favorite is the Gagarin.
That's also my favorite.
I'm not surprised at all.
Well, today's episode is the Lost Cosmonaut revisited.
Nice. Oddly enough, that's the one that also sounded like we were in a tin can.
I know. I was like, it's appropriate. That's what I was almost going to say to you last week when we were leaving. And then I was like, wait, I haven't told her what the episode's about, and I don't want to ruin the surprise. So, the Lost Cosmonaut, do you want to guess what episode that was?
Oh, that was episode like 5 or 6, right?
7. Episode 7. It came out April 2022, which is so long ago. And I will be honest, I didn't go back and listen to it. I just reread my notes on it because I was a little embarrassed.
It came out in 2022.
Or sorry, 2020. I just read it wrong.
Yeah, I was like, wait, well, we have our 4-year anniversary this year.
2020, April 2020. I didn't go back and listen to it because I didn't want to die of embarrassment.
Also, it's just kind of unpleasant to like audio. I almost said visually, but I'm like, no, the audio version of visually, just displeasing to listen to.
Yeah. So we are just gonna revisit the whole thing.
Bring it on.
All right. So we're gonna start with a brief history of the space program, which is how we started last time. And my notes last time were not a mess, but like, I do my notes so differently now. I don't know what 4 years ago Hannah was thinking. She was insane. She was in her 20s and wild. Okay, so we're going to start with February 20th, 1947. So we're coming up on that anniversary. So technically, this is the date that the very first animals were ever sent into space, technically.
And this is the part of the like history of space that I really, really hate.
Well, this is, you're not going to hate this part. Some fruit flies went up in a V2 rocket that the United States launched. At
least we started small.
We started very small. It reached 68 miles in altitude, which is 109 kilometers, The international standard for the boundary of space is 100 kilometers. So just remember that as we talk about what we're technically calling space. So like suborbital, you're very technically barely in space. And these fruit flies were there and came back and were alive. So technically the first animal in space. 2 years later, in June of 1949, Albert II, who was a, I'm going to say it wrong, rhesus monkey? Rhesus monkey. He became the first monkey, first primate, and first mammal in space on a V-2 rocket that was also launched by the United States.
What happened to Albert I?
I don't know. I think he died.
Did he die in training for his mission?
Maybe. I didn't write it down. But Albert II reached 83 miles, which was 134 kilometers. But his parachute failed to open when he came back and he died. Oof. So not good. We're not doing good. And then in 1951, July 22nd, the Soviet Union launches an R-1 rocket carrying 2 dogs. And their names were Saigon and Detzik. This got to 101 kilometers. They survived, so we okay. They became the first living organisms successfully recovered after a flight into space.
Well,
except for the fruit fly. I don't really know.
How would that be if, we were able to determine that the fruit flies lived?
Maybe I meant to write the first living mammals.
Maybe.
I don't know. Here is a sad/fun fact. One of these dogs went up on a later flight and died. Because part of the research that made me cry is and if you want to ruin your day, you can go read the Wikipedia page on dogs in spaceflight and just read about all of the dogs that were killed. Don't do it. It's awful. Some of
them were pretty painful, suffering deaths too, to my memory.
So one of these dogs was killed in another flight, and the other dog, after that happened, one of the engineers was like, we're not going to send that one up again. And he adopted her. And then she lived out 14 more years of her life in comfort and happiness.
As it should.
Yes.
Dogs cannot sign up to be astronauts.
Nor should they.
So, if you're going to force a dog in space once.
Yes.
Once.
And, oh my gosh.
And then they get to retire into a life of luxury. That's how it should be. Any animal that you're going to send in space, because they cannot consent to go to space.
Oh my gosh. And all of the dogs they used were strays that they got off the street. Some of them ran away the day before their launch, which I was like, good, run. And then they came back. And I was like, no.
Go away. I could get a steady meal here, so.
I know. And I'm like, that's the thing is they were being taken care of, and they thought they probably thought, okay, I can't. We're not crying. Okay. We're moving on to October of 1957. October 4th, 1957. Sputnik 1 is launched successfully.
Heard of that one?
Yes, we've heard of that.
I only had to do a giant project on it in 8th grade.
So it's launched into orbit, and it's the first artificial Earth satellite. And this means that the Soviet Union has officially gained the lead in the space race. A month later, on November 3rd, 1957, Laika the dog. She's your first picture in your dossier if you want to look at her, because she is such a sweet baby.
She was the first, when you think of animals in space, you think Laika.
You think Laika. So she's the first, quote, successful animal.
Space dog.
Yeah.
Yes, the other animals did technically cross the threshold into space.
Yes.
But she actually did, space travel kind of thing.
Yes. She made it into orbit. She was on Sputnik 2. So she was the first animal to ever orbit the Earth. Sputnik 2 made 2,570 orbits of the Earth. And the Soviet Union would later report that Laika was euthanized before re-entry. So she did not come back alive, but she did make some successful orbits while alive. And we will talk briefly about that later.
I'm assuming they had like some gas or something in there.
They had like an automated system to feed her, and
that's what I figured, because I'm looking at, she can't move.
Yeah,
she can't move around. Like, she just has to lay there. And
they had like poison for her food, essentially, and it's not great. So a couple months later, on January 31st of 1958, the United States launches Explorer 1, which was the first U.S. satellite. And then on January 31st of 1961, so 3 years later, we launch Ham, who was a chimpanzee, into suborbit on a Mercury Redstone 2 rocket. He traveled 150 miles, which is 241 kilometers, so like well into space, in a 16-minute, 39-second flight, and he was the first hominid to reach space. And he survived. He came back.
I love when you start just looking for those
like firsts.
Yeah.
And a fun fact about Ham is he actually retired into the North Carolina Zoo, and he lived to be, I want to say, into his 30s or 40s, and he died of like liver failure or something, like natural causes.
Yeah. Just being old
and being a monkey.
Organs failing.
Yeah.
It's kind of how it's supposed to happen.
Exactly. But he came to us, which was fun. On April 12th, 1961, Yuri Gagarin, he's your second picture. Little cutie patootie.
Why do I need a picture? I could just look at yours.
You could, but I put his cute little picture in there. Sure. He was 27, a little baby boy. He became the first man in space. He completed one full orbit around Earth. It took 108 minutes. And so the Soviet Union is maintaining their lead in space. I cannot emphasize how young I think 27 is.
And I mean, he looks like 24, honestly. He looks
like a little baby.
Like 23, 24. He looks so young.
I know. And
so young.
For reference, a month later, Alan Shepard goes up, and he's the first American in space. Alan Shepard, I think, was 37 or 36. He was like a solid almost decade older. And all of our astronauts they were into their 30s. So Alan Shepard becomes the first American in space on May 5th, 1961, with a 15-minute suborbital flight, 116 miles or 187 kilometers. And this is where I feel like the United States starts getting a little petty because the FAI, which is like the American, or no, not the American, the Institute for Flight, it's a French word for flight stuff. So according to their sporting code, Section 8, Chapter 2.18.4, quote, the pilot and crew of an aerospacecraft shall remain inside the vehicle during descent and landing. So Yuri Gagarin, when he had re-entered and descended, they had not figured out re-entry very well. So when he came down, he ejected from the spacecraft and parachuted out while his spacecraft crashed into the Earth. So he technically was not in it when it landed. And Alan Shepard had his spacecraft parachuted down into the ocean, and so he was technically in the spacecraft when it landed. So technically, his flight was the first, quote, completed human space flight per those definitions. I was like, y'all are getting fucking petty. All right, 2 years later, on June 16th of 1963, Valentina Tereshkova, who's 26, she's your next picture, becomes the first woman in space. She's kind of a badass. So fun facts about her. She was raised by a single mom. And in 1961, Nikolai Kim, the director of...
You're the one who actually studied Russian, so don't...
Listen, I get better at it. This one's kind of hard. Anyways, the director of the cosmonaut training program, he heard that the United States was training women to become astronauts, which, fun fact, we didn't take action on that for like 2 more decades.
Of course we didn't.
Of course we didn't. And he did not want the first woman in space to be American. So he's like, we're going to get on it. Valentina was selected because of her experience in skydiving, which she had just like become interested in, started doing, and then not told her family, which love that. The morning of her flight, she followed a tradition that Gagarin had started. So when Gagarin went to his flight, it took so long to get into like his gear and everything that when he was bussed out to the launch pad, he was like, I have to pee. And so he just peed on the tire of the bus. And so when Valentina got there, she's like, hold up. And I don't know how she did it, but she squatted and peed on the tire of the bus.
Nice.
So we love her for that.
That is epic. See, that's one of the things I love about the whole, like, anything you can do, I can do.
Yeah.
Like, people are like, oh, well, women can't do it because, this is how it's done. It's like, no,
we can do it.
We can do it. Like,
and we can probably do it better.
Probably do it better. And also there's other things that's like, like we shouldn't have to do it this way or whatever. Like, women playing on sports teams with men. It's like, yeah, we can share a locker room. Like, we shouldn't have to, but, like, if that's what it is, then we'll do it.
We'll do it. So Valentina spent 2 days, 22 hours, and 50 minutes in space. She completed 48 orbits. She is still to this day the only woman to have ever flown solo in space. And at that time, she held the record. She didn't hold the record. She spent more time in space than all of the U.S. astronauts combined, I think. That might not be right. She spent more time in space than our astronauts did.
Yeah, at that time.
At that time, yes. She's still alive. She's 86 today.
Did she ever go back into space?
I don't think so. Well, maybe.
I mean, did she stay, like, involved in the space program?
She did for a little bit. She married another astronaut. She was kind of forced to as like a publicity thing. I think they had a kid together and then they got divorced. And she got remarried. She's in politics now. Not politics that I agree with, so I don't want to like hold her up necessarily as like a hero.
Right.
So she serves as a representative in the state Duma, which is I think kind of like their parliament. She supported the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and she supported no term limits for Putin. So like I don't agree with a lot of her views. But she did
I think you're allowed to like some things that people do and not others.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. So like, she was cool and badass. A cool badass astronaut. 20 years later, after she went up, on June 18th of 1983, Sally Ride becomes our girl. She's the first American woman and the youngest American at 32. Can I remind everyone that Yuri Gagarin was 27 and Valentina was 26? Sally Ride was the first woman to go into space. She's also the first American woman, sorry. The first known member of the LGBTQ plus community to become an astronaut.
I didn't know that about her.
Me neither. And I don't know if that's why I got emotional reading her. This was the second time I cried. She's your other picture. I'm just giving you visuals for everyone. So she died of pancreatic cancer in 2012. And that is when it was kind of revealed that she was bisexual. Her obituary revealed her 27-year relationship and domestic partnership with a woman named Tam O'Shaughnessy. And she was posthumously awarded the Medal of Freedom in 2013 and several other awards, which just got me like...
Look at her Barbie.
I know there's a Barbie of her, which I really want now. I do have an astronaut Barbie that I love, but I gotta get
a Sally Ride.
Sally Ride Barbie.
Well, I never knew that that Barbie did an Inspiring Women series, and now I want to go look up and see who all the other, that's what the box says on the picture.
Ooh.
Inspiring Women series, and now I want to look up and see who all was in that.
I know. Oh, also, I promised my dad that I would mention, which I think I mentioned before, I have met Sally Ride. She was at space camp when I went. I was like 9, and I do not remember it very well and did not recognize the significance of it at the time.
It wasn't a big deal to you at the time.
Yes, but I have met her.
It's one of those things that you look back on now and you're like, crap, I wish I had paid more attention.
I know! She's so cool. Okay, so that's our brief history of the space program.
Now we're going to tell the real story.
Now we're going to tell some problematic things that happened. And I'm going to start with the United States, because we don't get out of this with a clean bill of health. Are you familiar with Wernher von Braun?
The name sounds familiar.
We have mentioned him once on the podcast because that Catholic cardinal priest guy claimed that he helped invent the time travel video recorder.
Yeah.
He's also your next picture. Sorry,
we have lots of pictures.
They're all
and I feel like
pictures.
it's so loud. Like every little shuffling paper noise. So I'm sorry, listeners.
He was essentially like our main rocket engineer or scientist. Also, do you recognize who's in that second picture with him?
Mm-mm.
That's Walt Disney.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, he did a little Disney program, teaching the world, teaching kids about rockets.
Love it.
Let me just tell you a little bit about Wernher von Braun. Old Wernher. He was born in 1912 in Wurzik, Poland, which at the time was part of Prussia, so he's German. He was kind of like a boy genius when it came to rocket science and engineering and like physics and math and stuff. So he became...
I feel like that's going to be Critter.
I hope so. That'd be great.
I'm like, I was totally prepared for like him to be, wild and kind of run around and climb and, very physically active kid, because that's more kind of me.
Mm-hmm.
I love to go like climb and jump on things. I still do. But he is not. He is a thinker and a problem solver.
He's a watcher.
So I'm like, he's not gonna cause chaos. Like I'm not gonna have broken bones. I'm gonna have explosions.
Yes.
He's gonna be like, science is cool.
I love this. Let's build some rockets in your backyard.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also excited for making, the at-home little rocket things.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
Science experiments more than broken bones. I'm just saying I was anticipating broken bones, but clearly it's going to be more
a nice
explosions
deviation.
and science experiments gone wrong. Like that one kid who was like super into radiation. There's a Dollop podcast on this kid. He's like, 15, 16 or so, and like he was like buying old clocks that had like the radium in there. And like scraping up to use to, I don't remember all the details, but like, yeah.
I'm pretty sure there's an episode of Young Sheldon that is about that. He was buying old smoke detectors for their radioactive material.
Yeah, we don't watch that show in our house.
Why not?
We boycott that.
Why?
And The Big Bang Theory.
Oh.
Well, because Shelton hates the laugh track.
Oh.
But beyond that,
There's not a laugh track on Young Sheldon.
There isn't?
Mm-mm.
Well, that's...
Because
that would make it more watchable.
I'm on the last season of it. And it makes me cry all the time. I'll explain why.
But also because everyone's like, Sheldon, that show. You must love The Big Bang Theory. Meanwhile, Sheldon's like, no, it's Shelton with a T.
Shelton.
Not Sheldon.
Oh,
So,
man.
I don't watch it.
I don't watch The Big Bang Theory, and I really didn't think I'd like Young Sheldon. But it became my comfort show, and I've blown through it. Now I'm almost done with it, and I'm mad about it. So, whatever. Okay, so Werner von Braun, he becomes involved in a small group of like-minded rocket enthusiasts who build and launch primitive rockets in an abandoned ammunition dump in suburban Berlin.
Oh, okay. I kind of have some questions, but I think I'm just going to let those go.
Well, it's like the 1930s at this point. So space travel is still very much like a science fiction idea to most people at the time.
Also, the idea of an abandoned ammunitions place in the middle of the suburbs in Germany makes sense when you say it's in the 1930s.
Yes. So eventually, young Werner catches the attention of the German military because it's the 1930s. And the German military has begun to see rockets not for space travel potential, but for weapons potential.
Because that's much more tangible than space travel, and also more useful. Like,
yes,
you know, what good is space travel in 1930s Germany?
Well, and also, I read something which I wish I had written this down in the treaty that they had to sign after World War One. Something having to do with like weapons that they couldn't have or whatever. Rockets weren't in there.
Yep. So this was a way around it.
It was like a loophole. Yeah.
Well, I forget, what was the treaty called again?
We can look it up.
But I remember when I learned about that in school, they were like, yeah, basically this treaty is kind of what set us up for World War II. By forcing them to sign this, it put Germany in such a bad spot.
Yeah.
That
was it the Treaty of Versailles?
That might be it.
It was a peace treaty.
I know that
signed in 1919.
I know that is a treaty, but I think it is.
Yeah.
Derek should probably cut this out so we don't sound too dumb.
I know. I'm like, oh well.
I'll blame it on, I'm tired. My brain is mush.
I'm gonna blame it on, I did so much research for this that I couldn't put everything in. So in 1932, von Braun, who is 20 years old, becomes the top civilian specialist at the German Army's Kummersdorf rocket station. So he's 20 years old. Like, that's what I mean when I say boy genius, is like he was like 18 and like the smartest rocket scientist in Germany, and at 20 he was like the head specialist of a rocket station. He would maintain for like his entire life that he was just like following the money to pursue his dream of rocketry, because like the money's in the military, which makes sense. And it's also possible that the German army didn't really give him a lot of choice in whether or not he would work for / with them.
And also he's 20.
Yeah.
So like,
but like he also didn't protest very much and was like, he was promoted very quickly within the military and like pretty not active, but like joined a bunch of clubs in the Nazi party, and like he wasn't inactive, you know, like he wasn't not enthusiastic about it. By 19
well, I mean, there was more to the Nazi party than the Holocaust too.
True.
Not much more.
Not a lot. By 1939, he was under a lot of pressure to produce military weapons. By 1942, he successfully tested the A4 missile, which Hitler would begin to mass produce using Jewish slave labor. As many as 20,000 prisoners died in the camps making these rockets, which would later be named the V2 rocket, which we have talked about. And that stood for Vergeltungswaffe 2, or the vengeance weapon. And they literally had a concentration camp that they would just like bring in people from and have them build these factories and then assemble and build the rockets. And it was like, I mean, the conditions were atrocious and people were just dying weekly, daily, you know, like,
I need chocolate, please.
And it should be pointed out that because Werner von Braun was like the head of this program, he very much knew about this and had to approve of it. And I think he toured he very well knew of it.
I wonder if it was probably, there was probably parts where he just honestly maybe didn't care, or like maybe, again, because he was kind of brought in at such an early age, he was more or less indoctrinated.
Yeah.
Into the ideologies, but also he's probably like, I get to like play with rockets, and
yeah,
he was more focused on the work than caring about anything else.
That was, I think, it. I think
probably very easy for him to turn a blind eye to.
Yeah, I think he said something essentially like he didn't like the slave labor because it wasn't efficient. And it's like, you're missing the point, buddy.
I wonder if he would have enjoyed Henry Ford.
And it's like, just stop.
They would have gotten along about efficiency.
It's like, stop at the first part of that sentence and you're good.
You didn't need those extra words.
Yeah, stop there. The missiles themselves, because the V-2 rocket was a ballistic missile, they killed approximately 5,000 people during the war.
And how many people died making these?
20,000 prisoners died making them. 5,000 people died from the actual missiles.
They were more deadly in their creation than their execution.
Yeah. I mean, but they were trying to kill both. They're trying to kill, Jewish people and also the British. So after Germany's surrender, the United States and Russia essentially went in and like pilfered as many.
I was about to say harvested.
Yeah. Because they
also pilfered scientists.
Yes. So we understood that like this technology was very important. We didn't have anything like it. Like, we understood the importance and significance of it. And so did Russia. So we went in, pilfered, harvested, whatever, parts, rockets, plans, and engineers. Von Braun recognized that it would be more beneficial for him to end up with the Americans, and so he kind of gathered his stuff and moved to a more beneficial area for him where he would be found by Americans first. Mm-hmm. So he was one of 120 scientists who were taken to the United States.
Which, again, is, like, I'm not trying to make excuses for him, but, like, he was clearly just following the work.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And, willfully turning a blind eye to.
He's very much just looking out for himself and for the, yeah. I mean, he
made some bad decisions. We'll just
leave
it there.
So the United States,
he's not a hero,
brings over 120, excuse me for using this broad term, but Nazi war criminals. And instead of punishing them in any way, we gave them brand new lives and shiny new careers. Wernher von Braun eventually became the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. As you saw in that picture, he did a program with Walt Disney. In 1953, his team developed the Redstone rocket, which was a descendant of the V-2, which became America's first ballistic missile. He also developed the Saturn V rocket, which would eventually carry the crew of Apollo 11 to the moon. So he was like the heart and soul of our space program.
I don't like the idea of him being the heart, because his heart was black.
He was also a Nazi war criminal that we just kind of looked the other way on because we needed his brain.
Probably the exact same way that he looked the other way. Mm-hmm. When all these people were dying for the production of these things that he's dreamed of.
Yeah. There was a quote, again, I wish I had written it down, that someone said...
What were you saying earlier about you're much more thorough in your notes than you were 4 years ago?
This was from a book. Listen, I was reading it in the waiting room of a doctor's office. I didn't have a place to write it down. But this person said when they were watching the moon landing, they couldn't help but think also of the enormous price that was paid specifically in the concentration camps of how we got here. And it was like, yeah, we don't talk about that enough. This was paid for in
That's because history's written by the victors.
Sure is.
I mean, but so much of where we are today, not just in like technology, but in so many different areas. You know, isn't there some kind of quote like the path to, you know, success or something is built off the backs of other people.
Yeah.
But something about that, like, there's been a lot of like big atrocities that have also kind of led to or made the way for these other awesome things. So we always focus on the shiny things and try to just like, oh, don't that big atrocity. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Let's just forget about that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, we're gonna now head across the ocean again, and we're gonna go back to Soviet Russia. Okay, so you remember Laika? Okay, so I mentioned that they used stray dogs. So she was a stray that they picked up. They thought that strays would be good candidates for their rocket travels because they were already like more resilient and used to harsher conditions. Which I'm like, yes,
because they've suffered enough. Leave them alone. Take them off the streets. That's why I said they get one trip to space, and then they get the cushiest digs possible.
I think they get 0 trips to space and just get adopted by nice families. Also, they said that she was like, just had like the sweetest personality, like got along with other dogs. I cannot. Okay. If you're drinking during this episode, just go ahead and take a nice drink, because this is the part that made me want to hold Kelly in my lap and never let her go. Okay, so it was known from the very start within the space program, or within the people who were designing Sputnik 2, that it would not be returning because they had not developed the technology to bring it back to Earth safely.
Which
is like, that seems irresponsible to then put a living creature in it. They admitted sometime after the launch, I believe, that it wasn't designed to come back. I don't think they announced beforehand, but they very fully knew when they put Laika in that satellite that she wasn't coming home. Okay, and I didn't write this down, but I have to share it. So one of the engineers took her home the day before the launch to play with his kids, because he said, I knew she didn't have a lot of time left and I wanted to do something nice for her.
Yeah, like one more, the best day.
I know. And then they said when they put her in the capsule, they kissed her nose and told her goodbye. And I'm like, who are you? How do you have beating hearts?
How can you, how can you care about this dog and still subject her to this fate?
Oh my gosh.
It's in the name of science.
I know.
Because
I can't at all. Okay. I'm going to go adopt a dog. Okay. So her vital signs during takeoff and the first several hours of the flight showed that she was extremely anxious and agitated. And
she's being launched into space. That doesn't sound like it's a pleasant experience.
And despite the fact that the Soviet Union said publicly and in official reports that she had been euthanized, she actually died of overheating just 5 to 7 hours into the flight because of a mechanical or technical failure that they couldn't regulate the temperature of the capsule. And the truth of her death was covered up until 2002. And Sputnik orbited the Earth for 5 months with Laika's body in it before it returned to Earth and disintegrated upon re-entry on April 14th. So like, her story is way more tragic than even what they admitted. Like, they admitted that they sent her up knowing she would die, and then they put her down. But then, like, the truth of it is actually that they sent her up knowing she would die, and then she died a horrible death, and then they didn't tell anyone that. Okay. On October 24th of 1960, this is a quick one, during the testing of a prototype for the R-15 intercontinental ballistic missile, one of the fuel tanks detonated, causing the missile to go boom. Big explosion.
Big boom.
It killed 78 to 165 people. And the Soviet Union denied the incident for years and never reported the deaths that it caused. Because why would you?
Never admit failure.
On March 23rd of 1961, so this is like 3-ish weeks before Gagarin's going up, we have a guy named Valentin Bondarenko, and he's your next picture. He was 24, and he was a cosmonaut in training. He was part of their, he was like one of their...
They're space cadets.
Yeah, like one of their Mercury 7, but the Soviet version. So he was in a pressurized isolation chamber as part of a 10-day training exercise. And the chamber was 50% oxygen and also soundproof. So he was in there just doing regular stuff. Mm-hmm. And he had removed some sensors from his body, like biosensors or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he was cleaning the residue off with an alcohol-soaked cotton pad. He threw it away, but he missed the trash can, and it landed on a hot plate, and it caught fire because we're in 50% oxygen. Mm-hmm. And he tried to put the fire out himself instead of calling for help. And his flight suit, which was wool, caught on fire. And because the chamber was pressurized, it took several minutes for help to get inside. And by the time they did, Valentin's entire body had been burned, but he was still alive. Mm. The doctor who treated him essentially said everything had been burned away. This is a quote from him. It was a total burn of the severest degree. He said, I'm not going to, I actually won't say the details because but in detail. And Valentin died 8 hours afterwards of shock. Which, again, please shoot me if that ever happens.
For real? 100%.
Well, because there's not a treatment for it.
Yeah, no. All you're doing is just it's basically let him suffer until he dies.
I know.
No.
And it's I know technically you can't really shoot someone, but also it's
Russia. They can definitely do that.
It's the Soviet.
If they can have an explosion that kills over 100 people mm-hmm. and deny that it happened, they can swiftly end this man's suffering.
It just, oh my gosh, 24.
I don't think anyone would have a problem with them. He's gonna die.
He's gonna die.
He can die now, or he can die in 8 hours.
After 8 hours of agony. Yeah.
Think about how much it hurts. You putting something in the oven and mm-hmm. you accidentally touch mm-hmm. part of the heated oven. How much that freaking hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it every time I get a really bad sunburn. This goes through my head.
Think of Valentin.
So Valentin's death was suppressed by the Soviet Union government for, quote, morale. And even though there were pictures and film of him, in the group of cosmonauts in training, they were just
don't worry about it.
And carry on. We're just going to ignore the fact that there's one less of them. No one asked questions. And the incident wasn't revealed publicly until 1986. So there's that. On April 7th of 1961, so this is a couple weeks later. Okay, so in our first episode, we reported, or I said, that Vladimir Ilyushin, who is a decorated Soviet test pilot, was secretly launched into space, and that he beats Yuri Gagarin. He's your next picture if you want to look at him. So the conspiracy here is that he made 3 orbits before a malfunction in the electrical system caused his guidance and radio controls to fail, and that when he landed, he was off course and crash landed in China, and that he was badly injured during the landing and taken in by the Chinese government. The Soviet Union allegedly refused to acknowledge this flight because it was such a failure, and so instead they launched Gagarin 5 days later. And we're
no, he's the first.
This is the first one. However, this time around, when I did this research, I couldn't really find any actual evidence to support this, other than like one person said it.
Mm-hmm.
So from what I can tell, the way it started was it was like a sensationalized news report that came out in 1961. So like as this was happening, Ilyushin never actually even trained as a cosmonaut. He was just a test pilot.
Mm-hmm.
At the time of the alleged crash, he was in China. He was at a quote health resort spa, but he was recovering from injuries he had sustained in a car accident in June of 1960. So like almost a year before, which makes me think that he was at like some kind of rehab place. But he was there and not like severely injured from a new thing. So it seems to have originated as a rumor reported by a Russian press correspondent for the Daily Worker newspaper, whose name is Denis Ogden. He quoted an unidentified source as giving him this information, and then like that was it. Like there was no other evidence. And it's like, okay, we get it. The Soviet Union lies about shit.
Right.
But can you give us more than just like, you think it happened? Because that's it. That's all we got. Next we have Vladimir Komarov.
The man we've all been waiting for.
Do you remember him?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I still have that picture in my mind.
I printed it for you this time, just in case you wanted to see.
I need a refresher.
Yeah. Okay. So April 23rd, 1967. So we are well into spaceflight. Vladimir was scheduled to go up on the Soyuz 1, which I think was like a prototype for what they were planning on eventually going to the moon in. The plan was Soyuz 1 was going to go up, and then the next day Soyuz 2 was going to go up with 3 astronauts inside, and they were going to do like a rendezvous dock situation. But there were hella problems with Soyuz spacecrafts in general. Unmanned test flights had experienced serious/fatal failures. There were 203 known flaws, and several engineers and cosmonauts, including Gagarin, who were all well aware of the like incredible danger of putting someone in this, filed a 10-page report outlining the flaws and calling to cancel the mission. But it's unclear if this report ever like made it to the right person and was actually filed, because it's like all they could do was like give it to the person who was supposed to give it to the next person who was supposed to. And it's like,
well, also, even if it had made it all the way to the top where it's supposed to, like there's no guarantee that whoever was in charge of making the decision would have really taken the advice.
And you know what's terrible is it sounds so my next point is the launch went forward as planned so as to stay on schedule. It reminds me so much of the Challenger, where like so many engineers knew that there was something that could potentially go very wrong and said something, and everyone else or the higher ups were like, we have to stay on schedule. It's not important. And it's just like,
no, the schedule's not important.
Is it important? Like,
the schedule is not more important than human lives. Sorry. I don't care how much money you're going to lose out because of delaying it. Like, not
and
worth
like,
it.
You didn't even get to the moon. Like, sorry. Okay. So the day of the launch, Gagarin, who was Komarov's backup, showed up at the launch pad. And there is like a story that they told Komarov that if he didn't go up, they would send Gagarin. And so Komarov said, well, I'm not going to let that happen.
Yeah, I'm not going to. Basically, sentence Gagarin to death.
Yeah.
Because I'm a coward or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go. Like,
Yeah.
which coward is not the word to use. You would not be a coward to not want to go.
And yeah, on a suicide mission. However, it seems really unlikely that they would have ever sent Gagarin because he was kind of like a national hero. They're not going to send him on this mission where he like will 100% die. But Komarov went anyways. I don't know why. So the day of, Gagarin shows up at the launch pad and was acting like kind of weird. Like he demanded that they give him a pressure suit. I think just kind of generally made himself like a nuisance, was just like demanding stuff and asking for things. Some
just kind of trying to hope to cause enough chaos to like delay things and have to.
Yeah. So some people thought he was trying to like elbow his way in and like get on the flight instead of Komarov. But some people also think he was just kind of trying to like cause enough chaos and become enough of a nuisance to either disrupt or delay or cancel the launch for that day. It didn't work. And Soyuz 1 launched anyways.
Did he at least get to pee on the wheel before?
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't mention that. Predictably, it immediately malfunctioned. Only one of 2 solar panels deployed, making it off balance and also not giving it enough power. It's only getting like half the power they were expecting. Komarov wasn't able to orient the craft due to various mechanical failures. Pretty quickly, they decided to cancel Soyuz 2.
Oh, did they?
Which I was like, oh, now you're thinking straight. And they made the decision to bring Komarov home as quickly as possible because now he's in like a broken spaceship, which
he can't control and also is not getting enough power to probably do life support. And
it's like, okay, so many people literally said that this was going to happen. And now you're like, oh my gosh, this is happening. We have to bring him home. And it's like, you fucking idiot. You could have just not sent him up there in the first place. Like, what if we just didn't do it in the first place? Like, okay. So from what I can tell, because I got a little confused about this whole process, he was able to orient the craft. There's a bunch of technical stuff about having to do it on a certain orbit and orientation and angles and stuff. During re-entry, the main parachute failed to deploy. Everything that I read said that the Soyuz 1 hit the ground at around 40 meters per second, which is around 89 miles per hour, which I'm not trying to be like dramatic. That doesn't seem that fast. It doesn't seem the speed that I would expect a spacecraft re-entering
to be plummeting to the ground.
Yeah. Also, I was under the impression that like he burned up on like that there was a failure with like a heat shield and he burned up on re-entry, or that he was okay. I say this because when they found his body was completely unrecognizable as a human body. It was like a lump of burned flesh that I think it was like 2 feet long. I mean,
he got smooshed and then incinerated.
Yeah. Because I texted my dad about this and I was like, can you help me understand? Because like, I understand the impact certainly killed him. Like, duh. But I was like, people who are in really bad car accidents don't look like that, I assume. So the best I could figure out is it hit the ground, and then after it hit the ground, the booster rockets or whatever that were supposed to slow it down went off after it hit the ground, and so it caused some explosions, and then it caught on fire because it was on fire when recovery teams found it. So I don't know if it was just a combination of he was really badly injured when he hit, and then his body was really, really burned, but it was not good. I mean, he did die, I think, immediately, but I have no idea if he was conscious the whole time going down. He was the first person that we know of who died during a space flight. And his death wasn't necessarily covered up, but the fact, like what caused it, the fact that the Soviet Union had ignored so many safety issues and forced the flight to go even though he didn't want to and everyone else didn't want to, that was covered up.
Yeah, because how old was he?
In
his photo here, he looks like he's in like what, early 40s?
Yeah,
early mid 40s.
Yeah,
it's hard to tell.
It is hard to tell.
So that's another reason why he'd probably be like, no, Gagarin, you are.
Yeah,
he's what, 30 at this point, early 30s maybe.
Yeah, probably
still too young.
Yeah, so that was 1967, and actually a year later, on March 27th of 1968. Yuri Gagarin is killed when his MiG-15 fighter jet crashed during a routine training. It was officially ruled an accident. Several different investigations into the circumstances were conducted by both the KGB and the United States Air Force, which I thought was interesting. None of them found any, like, foul play, but there are a lot of theories, a lot of rumors that Gagarin had been speaking out publicly about what happened to Komarov and about, like, the problems within the, like, the flaws in the spacecrafts and the problems and everything, and the negligence, and that basically that crash had been arranged, which is unfortunate. Finally, we've got June 6th of 1971. We have Soyuz 11, which is the equivalent of an Apollo mission. This is launched with 3 cosmonauts. These are the ones I practiced their names. Okay. Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. And there's pictures of them if you want to see them. Apparently, because the craft was really small, they did not wear pressurized spacesuits, which seems like an oversight on the design situation. The flight in itself, the mission, was more or less very successful. They spent 3 weeks in space. They docked with the world's first space station, the Salyut. They performed various spatial experiments, scientific experiments in space, which makes them spatial experiments. They broke the record for the longest time spent in space at the time. They voted in an election, making them the first people to ever vote from space, I guess. Victor turned 38, making him the first person to ever celebrate a birthday in space. They had like a generally great time. Mm-hmm. On June 29th, they prepared for re-entry, which was a largely automated process. So they just kind of had to set everything to the right settings, I guess, and then most of it would be automated. They undocked from the Salyut, and then their craft had to like separate into 3 sections so that they had their little section that would just go back to Earth. Mm-hmm. During the separation, which used explosive bolts, a pressure equalization valve was jarred open, which was not good, because that meant that the pressure in the cabin was now rapidly falling. There's evidence that Victor may have tried to close the valve. They were all strapped in their seats at this point, but he was the closest, and I don't know if it's just from the way his body was positioned, if they think maybe he reached for it. But their biomedical sensors showed that all 3 of them died within 40 seconds. And they likely lost consciousness within 20 seconds because the pressure in the cabin went from like normal to 0 very quickly. But re-entry continued as normal because it's automated, and the ground control didn't really know anything had gone wrong because they were already going to lose communication with them anyways during re-entry. So it wasn't until after they landed and the spacecraft was recovered that they knew, and they didn't, like, they recovered it. They just found them dead. They had no idea what had happened. They started, like, trying to resuscitate them because they didn't know. So it wasn't until their autopsies that they figured out what happened.
What does happen to a body in zero pressure?
Let me tell you.
So glad you asked.
Let me go back to. I actually didn't put that in there because I was like, oh, is that too much? Not too much to say.
Well, we touched on it a little bit in the ocean episode about too much pressure.
Mm-hmm. Right, because
and the rapid change of pressures.
Right.
With the divers and the getting sucked out and everything.
Okay, so this is talking about their autopsies. So they had hemorrhaging in their blood vessels, which was caused by the oxygen and nitrogen in their bloodstream bubbling due to the pressure change, or the pressure going to zero. They also had a heavy buildup of lactic acid in their blood, which, let's see, it says that's a sign of inadequate mitochondrial oxygenation, which may be due to hypoxemia?
Yeah.
Low blood oxygen.
Yep.
Poor blood flow.
Hypo meaning lower,
Yes.
zero.
Yes.
Oxygen. And emia is related to blood.
Yeah.
So basically they kind of were probably in just a lot of like muscle pain for several seconds, and probably just started feeling really terrible, but thankfully did lose consciousness, like you said, within 20 seconds. Oh, gosh. But, I mean, if you're... 20 seconds is a long time. Like, hold your breath for 20 seconds.
Yeah.
That's a long time, especially as you get... Or, even better, you hold a plank or something for 20 seconds.
I know.
Do a wall sit for 20 seconds. That's an eternity.
Space.com says the oxygen starts expanding and rupturing your lungs, tearing them apart, which sounds terrible. Mm-hmm. All of your bodily fluids would begin to boil. Your body would begin to expand, although your skin would be elastic enough to cope with the pressure change. I guess this says that you would go unconscious pretty quickly.
That's good.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be awake for all of that.
This says because you'd be unable to alter your dire situation, brain death would follow within minutes unless you were rescued and brought back to the safety of the pressurized, oxygen-rich environment of a spacecraft and resuscitated. So, although if your lungs are exploding, that doesn't seem great, but yeah. So, a lot of terrible stuff is the answer to your question.
It's not a good time.
It's not. It sounds terrible.
Everything about space travel sounds terrible to me. I have zero interest in doing this myself.
Of course, someone brought up the movie Gravity when I was talking about this research, and they were like, "Oh yeah, did you see that movie?" And like, "Oh yeah, remember when George Clooney?" And I was like, "You got to stop." I was like, every time I think about that scene, I have I need to hold on to something, like I need to ground myself to the earth, because the idea of floating so far and I think the idea of being surrounded by so much nothingness and being so alone. Oh my gosh, so alone. Oh,
it terrifies me. I intentionally did not watch that movie because I knew it would just freak me out, and it would keep me awake at night. I would have probably just weird nightmares and dreams. I would probably find myself just starting to think about it and going into an anxiety spiral over it.
I would take off my helmet at that.
Yeah, just
take it off.
End it.
Oh gosh. Okay, I gotta stop.
I can suffer for 20 seconds to be unconscious, and then just
it's so bad. Oh man. Okay. Those are all real things that happened that we just talked about. Unfortunately, none of those are Lost Cosmonaut that the episode is named after. That comes from two Italian brothers, Achille and Giovanni Giudica Cordiglia, who were from Turin, Italy. So, which there's a cool podcast. Did I reference it? If I didn't, I'll find it. I referenced the Vice article that references it. The guy who does the podcast wrote the Vice article, and the podcast is in that. But he interviews Giovanni, who I believe is still alive. Achille has passed away, but he interviews Giovanni and like he talks about all this cool stuff. So after World War II, there was surplus war equipment available by the kilogram in Italy. And these two brothers were like kind of technological nerd. They were like maybe like Critter might be. And so they bought up a whole bunch of broken radio receivers, and they would take them apart and fix them and just tinker and play around with them. They figured out how to tune into Soviet frequencies, and they did explain this. It went way over my head, but I guess there's different frequencies for different things. Like the United States frequency was like kept a secret, but they figured it out looking at a photo where they saw the antenna, and they figured out the length of the antenna because their dad was able to look at a diver in the picture and measure his cheekbones and figure out the like yeah, they're real smart. So they had been able to tune into Soviet frequencies. So they had listened to Sputnik when it orbited, and they could hear it beeping, which I think they broadcast that, like not them, but the world. And they also heard Sputnik 2 a month later. Sputnik 2, they mentioned, sounded really different than Sputnik 1. And what they thought they were actually hearing was Laika's heartbeat being monitored, because they were like, it wasn't like a regular beeping. It was kind of irregular and faster. And they said they actually got their dog and laid him down on the bed and listened to his heartbeat, and they're like, that's kind of what it sounds like. Which I'm like, bless.
Yeah, but how long did Laika actually survive again? Was it
5 to 7 hours?
Yeah.
They also heard Explorer 1 in 1958. They would later listen to Yuri Gagarin. They would listen to John Glenn. They even listened to the moon landing. Because they would like increasingly improve their setup, much like we're trying to do, but better.
Because they know what they're doing.
Because they know what they're doing. So on November 28th of 1960, they were listening to their Soviet frequency like they would do every night. And they heard a very fast SOS in Morse code that was repeating. And Giovanni said that it was getting softer, which meant it was getting further away. And he said you can tell a difference between it getting softer because it's orbiting and getting further away, and it getting softer because it's moving away from the Earth.
Yeah.
So they knew by this point about...
It's interesting you think you can tell the difference between...
I know. Again, he explained that, and I was like, whatever, I'm sure. He was like explaining radar or sonar and something.
Well, I just, sitting on the porch of my grandmother's house, is kind of up on the hill, and there's a road at the down at the bottom of the hill, and you can hear a car coming. And so my grandmother and I would sit out there, and we would try and guess, was it coming from the left or the right? Yeah. And sometimes we would try and guess if it was a car or like a truck or SUV, or if it was a bigger truck or something.
Well, if you had Giovanni, he could have told you.
He probably could have told us.
Probably. Well, they knew by this point about Laika and how the Soviets had sent her up knowing that she wouldn't come back. But they also recognized that this SOS was like a human thing, like not something that a dog or like a ape or something could potentially do. So they're kind of beginning to form ideas. And then a couple months later, on February 2nd of 1961, they heard another transmission. They described this as labored breathing, and also what they thought was a heartbeat transmitted as biometric data, similar to kind of what they heard with Laika. It was also fading quickly, indicating that it was moving further away. A couple weeks later, on February 12th, the Soviet Union launched Venera 1, which I believe was a satellite that they launched towards Venus. They had launched another one on February 4th. I did read some reports that said February 2nd, but I don't know if that's correct. It failed to leave low Earth orbit. They didn't acknowledge that failure. Instead,
Of course they did. It's a Soviet Union.
Instead, they were just like, oh, that was just a test for future mission. We definitely weren't sending that up as like our real thing. So now Achille and Giovanni are like obviously speculating that what they were hearing was like possibly the earlier launch, possibly a human person on board traveling really far away from Earth. And now they're like, what did we hear before? Like, oh gosh, what was that? On May 19th, they intercepted an even more distressing transmission. This was a woman's voice. And she says a lot of things. And it's all in Russian. So they're having to get it translated. At some point, they get their sister to start learning Russian because they would bring these recordings to several different interpreters and they would all come back with like different translations. And they were like, can you please be consistent? So some of what this recording says, she says, come in, come in, come in, listen, come in, talk to me. I'm hot. I'm hot. She talks about oxygen. She says, isn't this dangerous? She later on she says, I feel hot. I feel hot. It's all hot. I can see a flame. I can see a flame. I can see a flame. 32, 32. Am I going to crash? Et cetera, et cetera. And on the podcast, you can listen to the actual transmission. A few days later, they intercepted another recording that said, conditions growing worse. Why don't you answer? Hate that.
Yep. So I had a question when they were able to hear, you know, other space missions and whatnot, like especially ones that, you know, we can verify that they did hear.
Yeah.
Were they one-sided where they could only hear what was going on from the spacecraft, or could they hear, you know, like mission control responding? Could they hear the back and forth?
I think they could only hear the one-sided part.
What was being transmitted out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But they definitely like could verify that they.
Yeah, they're like, oh no, that's John Glenn.
Yeah. Like when they got the John Glenn one, they like showed it to like US people and they're like, oh my God, how did you get this? And they're like, what do you mean? We intercepted it. And they were like,
we just put the antenna up.
They were like, that's not good. And they weren't like secretive or shy about what they were doing. Like they would tell reporters regularly. Like they were not secretive. So they were going to the press about it. At one point they were approached by a KGB officer who was like, I'm not with the KGB, but I need to see your equipment. And they were like, no.
You don't.
And someone from the Italian government kind of interceded and acted as their like quote guardian angel. And he said they kept them from having quote an accident at the hands of the KGB. Also, it's speculated that maybe they got like a little bit too famous for the KGB to like do anything without it being too
It's
obvious.
one thing for the KGB to take care of their own citizens. They don't want to cause an international incident by going after someone else.
Like teenage Italian brothers.
They're just a couple of kids being science nerds.
I know.
Good for them.
I know.
Plus, I mean, it's other than hearing things that, you know, they're not supposed to hear, at the same time, like, you know, at least with the U.S. missions, you know, that's government stuff, and like we're, as the public, we're already supposed to have, you know, a certain amount of access to that. Yeah. Like it's supposed to be all public record. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not ideal. I guess it's more worrisome. It's like, the fact that they can listen in is more worrisome because what else can they listen in on? Yeah. And versus what they're actually like, what they're hearing now, what they're listening in on this is not that big of a deal. The fact that they can do it. Yeah. Just a couple of kids. Boy, in Italy. Yeah. Yeah. That's the worrisome part.
Yeah. I think they actually started, I don't know if it was the Soviet Union or the United States, started telling their astronauts, like, just be careful what you say, like, while you're up there, because people apparently
People are
teenagers can intercept your transmissions. So like, maybe don't, if you can see like, I don't know, warheads or whatever from space, maybe don't mention that. Write it down and tell us later. Send it in code. They had other recordings, and I could not find like transcripts of these recordings. So all I have is like a description of allegedly what they say. In October of 1961, they apparently recorded. Okay, I take it back. I have a description of what they think of what they interpreted as happening, not of what they heard being said. So in October of 1961, they believe they heard a spacecraft that somehow was, quote, or had, quote, veered off course and vanished into deep space, which we will talk about whether or not that's possible. In November of 1962, they heard a spacecraft that apparently misjudged re-entry and bounced off Earth's atmosphere, which is one of my greatest fears in the world. In November of 1963, they heard another female cosmonaut who apparently died during re-entry. And in April of 1964, they heard a male cosmonaut burn up on re-entry. Obviously, a lot of people don't believe them and think that these recordings are fake. A lot of people have thought that the female cosmonaut that they heard was their sister. They got because she spoke Russian or was learning Russian. People point out that none of the alleged cosmonauts in the recording followed standard protocols like identifying themselves or using like proper technical terminology. And I will point out that even Vladimir Komarov, what I read about him was even when he was about to re-enter in his extremely faulty spacecraft and knew that he was likely not going to survive, everything that I read said that he remained really calm and professional and like in his communications, at least. They asked Giovanni about this in that podcast. They're like, well, what do you say to people who say that? And he was like, I don't know. If you're about to die, like, are you thinking about like...
Are you worried about protocol?
Yeah, are you worried about that?
It's like, that's an absolutely fair thing.
Yeah.
But also, like, are they really trying to, like, capitalize on intercepting these things? Or are they just like, we heard something, we want to share it with others. Like, this is interesting. Like, who cares if they believe these people or not? Like,
yeah. And that was the thing. I didn't...
Like, you have issue, you don't want to believe it? That's fine.
Yeah.
Don't believe it. Like, I'm
know
not trying to convince people. We're not trying to, like, make money off of this.
Yeah. It's like that John Titor thing where he was like, I'm not trying to convince you that I'm a time traveler. I'm just telling you stuff. Like, I'm not trying to make money off of it. And as far as I could tell, they didn't make any money off of this. They just, like, told the press.
Yeah.
And if anything, put their lives in danger.
Yeah. Like,
it's the KGB after them.
And I mean, it's, it's not like some hoax that's like wasting resources and whatnot, kind of like Balloon Boy or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not one of those hoaxes that's gonna like be hurtful or detrimental. Like, nobody's being hurt, even if it is a prank or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, as far as I see, if it is made up, if it is fake, it's an interesting story.
Yeah, exactly. Another similar thing they said was that the recordings had grammatical errors and incorrect phrasings, and that some of them, the Russian didn't quite have the right accent. Which I'm like, I feel like that's a little nitpicky, because also
how clear is the audio too? Anyway,
I mean,
is it?
I mean,
does it sound as great as we do?
I mean, when you listen to it, you're listening to someone speaking Russian, so it's hard to tell how clear it is. But I will say, when I have listened to, like, American, like, communications or whatever, I can barely tell what the hell they're saying. When, they're...
Radio is hard to understand.
Especially when it's coming from space. Yeah. And it's the 60s. Yeah. Like... listen to the moon landing. It's hard to understand what they're saying. Yeah. If you didn't know. Come on. Okay, about veering off course and vanishing into deep space. I just got to put this in here. I don't think you can actually do that. The the note that I have is that it's impossible to accidentally leave Earth's orbit, or it was in the 1960s, because the propulsion powerful enough to leave Earth's orbit wasn't around until later in 1969. And because gravity is a thing. So you can't just oops. You can't just oops out of a gravitational pull. So that probably didn't happen. But that was also just their interpretation of what they were hearing.
Right.
I don't think they heard someone say, oh no, we accidentally broke out of Earth's gravitational pull and now we're leaving.
I mean, you're in the living room and you hear a noise in the kitchen and you're like, oh, that's probably just Jarek cooking, and he might have, it sounded like he accidentally knocked, the salt container into the sink.
Right.
You don't know.
Yeah.
That's just based on the noise you heard.
Exactly.
That's your best guess of what happened.
Yeah. The bouncing off Earth's atmosphere, I know, is a thing. They talk about it in Apollo 13. Because you got to get the angle of reentry right. Otherwise, it's like you're skipping a stone on a river. And you just bounce off. And you go, goodbye. And maybe you hit orbit again, but you're not going back into the atmosphere. I don't know if you go into deep space. Okay, so the Giudica Cordiglia brothers have always maintained the validity of the recordings. Their families have always maintained the validity. Giovanni, I said he's still alive. His son helps him preserve the stories today. So it's been pointed out if the whole thing was a hoax, they've got their whole families in on it, and they're really playing the long game on sticking to it.
And right. Other than maybe a little bit of notoriety, what are they actually gaining from
this
exactly.
Hoax? They're not. That was my next point. Is they didn't have a reason to fake them. They didn't get any money. If anything, they just put themselves in danger. And then it's not it's out of the realm of possibility.
Not at all.
Based on the whole first part of this podcast. The Soviet Union absolutely did reckless, dangerous things. They absolutely put cosmonauts in danger and then covered it up. They covered up a lot of failures.
People died.
A lot of people died. A lot of people were injured. A lot of dogs were killed. So it's sorry if you don't want this to be part of your lore, Russia, but also don't kill a bunch of cosmonauts and keep it secret for 50 years.
Don't cut corners.
Exactly. I said it tracks that if they lost a human in space and there was no evidence, they would just deny that it happened. Which, that I think makes a lot of sense that, if it was just, someone's floating around there in space and no one's ever going to find out because a body's never going to come back, that's really easy to just be what are you talking about? That person never existed.
Yeah.
Just say they never existed.
Aleutian who?
Yeah. What are you talking about?
He's in China. Rehabbing after a car accident.
Yeah, don't you know that? Okay. I'm going to end it with this. On August 2nd of 1971, during the Apollo 15 mission to the moon, astronaut David Scott placed a small aluminum astronaut on the surface of the moon, face down, alongside a small plaque bearing the names of 8 Americans and 6 Soviets who had died in their respective countries' efforts to reach the moon. And this is known as the fallen astronaut. And I'm going to read the names of everyone. And the 5 of the American astronauts, one of them I think died in a car crash, and then 4 of them died in plane crashes. And so those were I think while they were in training, because our 3 official died during space, whatever, was the Apollo 1 fire, which was very upsetting.
I remember watching that in From Earth to the Moon.
I know.
I was I think I'm ready to stop watching this after that.
Yeah.
Because also my favorite character was one of the, I don't remember.
Gus.
I don't remember who it was.
It was Gus.
Maybe.
You said it in an earlier episode. It was Gus.
Was it?
Gus is everyone's favorite. Gus is my favorite astronaut.
I just remember if he was, I know this is an actor, not actually him, but I was he's cute and I love his personality and blah. And then he died.
Well, you can watch The Right Stuff and they end it before that happens.
Yeah, I'll do that instead.
And Fred Ward plays Gus Grissom. I love him. And Dennis Quaid's in it.
Well, I don't know. You had a bad experience with the Dennis Quaid movie the other day.
Lord, I just cried through everything. It's fine. Okay, so here's the names of the astronauts and cosmonauts who are on the plaque. Theodore C. Freeman, Charles A. Bassett II, Elliot M. C. Jr., Virgil I. Gus Grissom, Roger B. Chaffee, Edward H. White II, Vladimir M. Komarov, Edward G. Givens Jr., Clifton C. Williams Jr., Yuri A. Gagarin, Pavel I. Belyayev, Georgy T. Dobrovolsky, Viktor I. Patsayev, and Vladislav N. Volkov. And those are the fallen astronauts who...
Was that kind of in a chronological order?
I think so. And they didn't... I don't think they told, obviously, like, the main people, but I don't think they released that information to the public until after the program, or until after the mission. So it was kind of like a little private thing that they did.
Yeah.
But
they're like, we're not doing this for publicity or whatever. Like,
yeah.
we just legit from one spaceman to another.
Yeah.
Respect.
Yeah. And I think there's something so special and cool about, like, memorials on the moon, because it's like they're always going to be there, and they're, I don't know, it's, and like,
see, that's the same thing that makes me choke up, like I told you the other day about the firemen.
And it's, I mean, unfortunately there's names that need to be added to that list, but I think it's a nice gesture.
Oh, definitely. Respect. I love that whole, like, we're gonna forget about any kind of petty, competition between countries.
Yeah.
And, like, whatever our differences are, like,
Yeah.
we're scientists.
Yeah.
Like,
We're
we've
scientists,
got
we're
the same
pilots,
goal.
yeah.
Like, we can, like, what is it? Respect the game.
Yeah. So that is The Lost Cosmonaut revisited. I'm not calling it part 2. It's just redone 193 episodes later. Remastered. There you go. That's good. I'll put that instead of revisited. Remastered. Because hopefully we sound better in this one.
Oh, gosh, yeah. A whole lot better.
I know. Hey, at least, I don't want to jinx it, but I don't have that weird feedback in my ears, which I realized I could hear. Remember that weird, I said it sounded like a printer in the background? I could hear it in the last episode, which no one go back and listen for it, because you have to listen really carefully. But I was listening to our episode, and I was like, I hear it in the background. So it wasn't just in my head. It picked up.
Well, I apologize for any and all of, like, the paper shuffling noise. Like, I was trying to hold it out away from, because, it's the directional mic. So I was like, well, it's probably
okay.
Sorry.
It's like sound effects. Yeah. It's like on, do you listen to Pastimes? It's like a dollop. It's a shorter dollop where they read old newspapers.
Oh, yeah.
But they have, like, a sound effect. I'm positive it's a sound effect, because I don't think Dave Anthony sits there with an old newspaper. But it's a sound effect of him, like, turning the page of a newspaper when he's, like, starting a new story.
I like it.
And I'm like, no one believes you're actually looking at a newspaper from 1918. You're looking at a screen.
Yep.
Come on, Dave. So it's like that, except ours is real, because you have a paper dossier in front of you.
I do.
As you do. And I don't know if you noticed, that's your original dossier.
So I noticed that it said dossier, and I was like, oh, she wrote dossier on there. But I was like, no, didn't it used to be on there?
It did. It's also a pink folder. It used to be, I found all of my dog folders when I organized this room, and I found the original one we used for it.
Yeah, because I was using a yellow one for a while.
Mm-hmm.
It's
that was just
different.
But
the dogs are the same.
Dogs are the same.
The dog CA.
The dog CA. And now I realized I have to figure, for the last 4 weeks I've had my episodes, like, very easily planned. The last 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. And now I have no idea what the I'm doing. So
I guess that means it might be time for a Tell We Tale.
Tell We Tale. Hey, you've got your, if you don't want to do a creature feature, you've got the Bone Wars you could do.
Oh, that's right. I knew there was some. I was trying to think of it today. I was like, what? Because I do have my next in my series that I want to do, but I think that one's going to take a lot more time. And so I think I will try and have try and work on the Bone Wars this week. So
Yeah.
maybe we can do the Bone Wars Thursday.
Okay. D is for...
Well, D is for Demon Who Can Be Such a
Okay.
Pest. And I'm going to skip that one
Okay.
because we've already done... So like I said, I'm skipping a couple.
Mhm.
Like I skipped Alien.
Right.
Because we've done several Alien episodes. Skipping Demon. I think I'm going to skip E is for Enchantress.
Okay.
With powers so grand.
F is for Frankenstein.
Frankenstein's monster crafted by hand.
Nice.
So when I have an idea of what I want to do for that one, but that one I think is going to take a lot of research.
Yeah.
So I'll pause that series for a
Okay.
little segue into the Bone Wars. And yeah.
Nice. Cool. All right.
Alrighty. Well, if you want to see pictures from my dossier, I think we're not going to put the...
Yeah, I don't think we'll put Komarov's
No.
death picture.
Um,
You can
but-
Google that.
all of the other awesome astronauts and cosmonauts that we talked about.
And Laika the
And,
Cosmodog.
of course. The Cosmut.
Oh, the Cosmut. Little baby.
You should check out our Facebook and Instagram. Search the Tales We Tell podcast. And if you want to see pictures but you don't do the social media, check out our website, thetaleswetellpodcast.com. All of our pictures and everything are up there as well. And if you want to support us and get yourself some sweet, sweet swag, you should check out our Redbubble store. Search the Tales We Tell. We've got several different logo designs, and you can put that on anything.
Yep.
And if you want to support us but you don't need the stuff except, I don't know, early access, commercial-free listening, sometimes some fun bonus content. We'll send out, random stickers and love notes, Christmas cards, etc. Become patrons at patreon.com. Search the Tales We Tell. And
That's it.
we'll see you guys next week.
Yep.
Bye-bye.